I think it is pretty clear to most audiences what it means and what it's trying to do and what it's trying to achieve. Whereas some of these other terms are a bit too vague. Now, turning specifically to Korea, challenges that Korea faces is politically very sensitive undertaking. By definition, nation branding means projecting a certain vision of the nation, and that leads to the natural question: well, who has got the right to decide what this vision is? It also it goes far beyond advertising and branding. It touches upon issues of national identity. And there are a few issues that provoke more deeply held emotions than national identity. Particularly in the case of Korea, where these issues are always very close to the surface and very controversial. And for any country, it's extremely difficult to distill something as all-encompassing as national identity into a message of something for a foreign audience. And indeed, these difficulties have led many people to conclude that nation branding itself is fundamentally can't be done, because these obstacles are too great and can never be overcome. Obviously, I don't agree with that view, because they are challenges, but I think that they can be overcome. Now, this term is, it surprises me how frequently Korean policymakers and academics seem quite happy to use this term for the Korean discounts. I think if I was Korean, I wouldn't be talking about this quite as much, but just to explain briefly what it is, in case not everyone's familiar with it. The so-called Korean discount is believed to be the belief that made in Korea is not as prestigious a provenance and origin as made in Japan or made in Germany for a range of export products. Now, my view would be that has to be put into perspective. It's only a discount if you're comparing yourself to the top class, which in this case is Japan and Germany. If you're in relation to other nations, then that discount is not a discount, it's actually a premium. So if you compare it to, say, China, Korea actually benefits from quite a vast premium. But that issue is widely discussed at the conferences I've been to in Korea. It's a matter of great concern for policymakers and academics. Negative images of Korea. I place a question mark here because, again, the conferences I've been to and the articles I've read by Korean authors seem to be based on the assumption that the rest of the world is extremely familiar with everything that's going on in Korea. And to give a reality check, that's not the case. Most foreign audiences are not focused as keenly on Korea as everyone here in this room is, and focused in Korea. So there's a great concern amongst Korean policymakers that images of Korea are based on corruption that exists there, violent street demonstrations, and this kind of negative imagery. But I think the reality is, for many foreign publics, that they are completely unaware of such issues. So to determine, what the true situation is, are these perceptions real or are they imagined? Relevant research is required, and I think this is an area where branding and business can provide some very useful techniques for governments. Now, one question that's I found very useful, and I've often used it in research I've done, is a qualitative technique. Brand association is based on a very simple question, an open-ended question. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Korea? Or if you're doing this for other countries, you just change the word Korea, the word Japan, the word USA, and so on. Now, this technique is very good at actually generating the perceptions that exist within the audiences you're targeting, rather than the perceptions that you assume exist within those audiences. Now, these are the responses I got from some of my classes in Tokyo. I won't be publishing this as part of any separate journal article because it wasn't done on any large scale or in a particularly rigorous way. It was just to demonstrate that this can be a useful technique and it can provide some very vivid imagery for policymakers to analyse. The classes I teach in Tokyo, the students are roughly 50% Japanese, the other 50% are mainly American, and some from other parts of Asia. Now, some of the images that they came up, spicy food, lots of part from Japan. Military, that is one of the images that Korea's nation branding would like to reduce. Because whenever military comes in, it's usually perceptions of North Korea acting in a belligerent way, or potential conflicts within a peninsula. Other things, movie industry on the rise, Korean barbecue, plastic surgery, and then the ones that policymakers are maybe concerned that are actually widely held global perceptions, which I don't believe they are. But people get happy to politicians find the benefits. Now, this was a class of students in Tokyo, so that there is coverage of what's going on in Korea. If I asked a class of students in the United Kingdom, I think there would be very little imagery at all. And so the issue there would not be taking negative images, it would be raising profile. Some more images, the big corporate brands, and food, which recurs, which obviously a positive thing. People, friendly people, tied to their roots. Spicy food again. Small area separated in north and south. Challenge to the world. Again, that's the kind of imagery that also needs to be addressed. If that is widely held within a certain foreign audience that is being tagged. Samsung Hyundai again, 2002 World Cup, which is a great showcase for what's happening. And then one, this is probably the most eloquent answer that was made by the students. Quite detailed, very Asian, but different from Japan or China. In terms of branding, that's the kind of thing you want to hear. It's authentic, it's rooted, but it's different from the natives. Okay, so you've got something real to distinguish. Korea is very friendly and positive, kind people, interesting culture, delicious food, pretty women, and then something Korean War inserts itself. And then North Korea is bad, South Korea is good. Discuss. So it's a simple question, and I don't know if anyone here has ever conducted any kind of research that uses that question. If you're going to ask that question of members of the public, usually you have to leave that question towards the end of the questionnaire, because otherwise people will think it's a bit strange, asking people to use their imagination in that way. But I think it can be very useful. It provides you with real perceptions that exist. But that kind of research needs to be conducted in relevant places. So wherever Korea's got specific objectives, that's where that research needs to be conducted. Rather than conducting a study that covers maybe the US and Japan and Europe and then aggregates the results, I don't think that's a particularly useful way to make policy. So as I said in the final point there on this slide, perceptions of Korea within European countries will almost certainly be very different from perceptions within Japan or China, Taiwan, and so on. Someone else commented that the Korean wave, the Korean culture, that wave hasn't really reached Western Europe. It's very common, very successful within Asia, but it's not yet full. Another issue that is fairly unique to Korea is the existence of a small number of corporate mega brands, extremely successful, highly respected corporate brands. Thus, there is a sense that those companies are hiding their Korean origins. And Therefore, unlike, say, Sony or Toyota, which are very clearly and